Greetings everyone, and welcome to Captain John's almost live story half hour, brought to you from the quiet fishing village of Little River, Nova Scotia, Canada. Here's me and my friend Juno, our rescue doggy. Go on, sweetheart, go see Mom. Okay, so I'm Jonathan White, and amongst other things, I'm an author with five popular books. And my intention today, on this third episode of Captain John's Story Hour, half hour, is to take you away from the madness of what's going on in the world right now. It's April 18th. We're about 2 months into this coronavirus situation. And I'm just hoping to sort of give you an escape. So what I'm going to do today is read an adventure story from this book. Everyone said I should write a book, my first book. And we're not going to be at sea this time. In fact, we're going from the depths of the ocean to the heights of the world in Kashmir in the Himalaya mountains. So I will be in two parts, part one, part two, and we'll start with part one right now. Okay, and this is called Kashmir Adventures, Part 1, Into the Foothills of the Himalayas. When I was a young boy growing up in London, I used to read a weekly comic magazine called The Beano. One of the serials was about a fearless white hunter who roamed through an exotic country called Kashmir, protecting the meek natives from tigers and lions. I had pulled out my atlas and discovered that there really was such a place in northern India, in the foothills of the Himalayas. I look forward to reading his exploits each week, usually late at night in a tent I made in my bed, with a torch to read by and a length of rubber hose as a breathing tube. A dozen years later, I was squashed into an ancient wheezing bus, the only foreigner surrounded by smiling old Indian ladies in dazzling saris, young families with happy, boisterous kids, and an assortment of chickens and goats, laboring up dangerous mountain passes on my way to Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir. One family had lit a charcoal fire at the back of the bus and were boiling eggs. An Indian man sang a melodious song and others clapped and sang along. The air was pungent with the exotic smells of Asia: curry, turmeric, jasmine, cardamom, sweat. The bus was suddenly enveloped by dark as we squeezed into a narrow rock tunnel, low, dank, dripping with water. I sat by the window, seeing nothing, thinking how I came to be here, living a childhood fantasy. A few days before, my friends Pat and Dave had decided to leave New Delhi and make their way north to a place we'd heard about from other hippies as who traveled along parts of the fabled old Silk Road. There was a large lake in Kashmir, surrounded by mountains, where you could rent a beautiful houseboat and be waited on by servants for just a few dollars a week. I had had to stay in Delhi by myself, waiting for money to be sent to the American Express office, and now that it had arrived and I had a couple of $100 in my pocket, I was on my way up to the foothills of the Himalayas to join them. The dark went on, and I realized we were inside the Kashmir Valley Tunnel, which burrowed more than a mile through the foothills. We emerged into blinding sunlight, and I peered down at a precipitous drop, just inches from where the bus clung to the road. It's 400 grueling, hot, scary miles from Delhi to Srinagar, and the previous night we had stopped in the town of Jammu to sleep. I didn't know it then, but I would be spending a lot more time in Jammu on the way back and would have a life-altering experience there. As the sun started to set and bathe the surrounding Himalaya mountains in a purple glow, we spluttered into the old bus station in Srinagar. The bus seemed to sigh with relief as people clambered down from the roof and threw bags and assorted livestock onto the road. I jumped out of the bus, cheerily waving goodbye to the people I had spent the last 2 days with. Pat was waiting for me, and we walked a mile or so toward the lake. Suddenly there it was, this vast body of water, serene and glistening in the sunset, surrounded by majestic, shimmering mountains and lined with magnificent wooden houseboats of all sizes. Small canoes were crisscrossing the lake, and many fires were being lit as the sun sank lower, I marveled at this magic place as Pat led me up the gangplank onto a 60-foot teak floating palace. This was to be my home for the next 3 weeks at the affordable price of $1 a day per person, including meals. I met the others who would be living there, including a languorous Dutch girl named Annika. After being shown my bed, I wandered around the boat, intrigued by the gorgeous carvings and wall hangings. And soon I was called onto the aft deck, and there was a large table piled high with naan and dishes of curries and vegetables. I met our servant family, who lived on a small plain houseboat tied to the back of ours. And then we ate and ate, sang songs, smoked fine Kashmiri keef, drank bad wine, and told stories and tales of far-off places and the adventures we had had. Other travelers from many different countries wandered over to our floating palace, and soon there were 2 or 3 dozen long-haired hippies playing guitars, beating drums, making music through the Himalayan night. Sometimes, when you're having an adventure, you don't realize it at the time, unless it's uncomfortable or dangerous. But even though we were safe on the boat, being taken care of, adventure was waiting. In fact, being on Dal Lake was an adventure in itself. Occasionally, as a bus had made its way up the mountain road, we had been forced to stop and wait for a caravan of glistening tanks and rockets on giant transporters coming from somewhere in China, heading for the India-Pakistan border. In Pakistan, several weeks earlier, there had been a fervor of anger with India over the long-disputed Kashmir territory. Many cars had bumper stickers that read, "Crush India." There was talk of war, but no one in India gave it much credence. Now, however, it seemed more real. There was word coming in that Pakistani politicians were whipping people into a frenzy that war was inevitable. America was supplying Pakistan with old, ancient tanks and guns and was supporting their cause. In India, all seemed calm, although the weapons I saw in the mountains were new, menacing, and apparently Chinese-made. The peace of the last few nights had occasionally been shattered by a distant crump as an artillery shell found the target. There was a small community of Western hippies living on the lake, and we had a big dinner to discuss what to do. A few said they were going far south to Goa on the coast. Some said they would head to Nepal, and the general consensus was that Kashmir would not be the best place to hang out if war came. I decided to travel far south to Goa, where there was a large hippie community living on the beach under the palm trees next to the sun. Everyone was splitting up, deciding to head back west to Afghanistan before the India border closed, or head south or east to Nepal. We had a large farewell meal on the boat: rice, eggs, naan, curries, vegetables. The following morning, I headed to the bus station alone and bought a ticket for the first bus down the mountains to New Delhi via Jammu. I'd felt a little queasy when I woke up that morning, and as the bus lurched down the mountains, the engine whining in protest as it was kept in a low gear, my queasiness grew into severe stomach pain, and I broke out in a sweat. I staggered up to the driver and motioned him to pull over. He protested, but agreed. I disappeared into the bushes and quickly got rid of the huge meal from the night before, but I felt very weak and disoriented. An hour later, I made the driver stop again, and this time there was blood. Somehow I made it back to the bus. People were muttering about how I was wasting time making the bus stop, but I didn't hear them for long, because covered in sweat and shaking, I passed out. Part 2. The hospital from hell. I felt someone pulling at me and opened my eyes. There were 2 young Indian men peering down at me, both showing genuine concern on their faces. One thing I had noticed about the Indian people, they were usually gracious and curious, and above all kind. They said I had been unconscious for several hours, and we were now in the town of Jammu. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me. They each put one of my arms over their shoulders and helped me off the bus. I was sweating and in intense pain. Everything was blurry. Grabbing my backpack, they hustled me into an old Hindi taxi. "Oh, we will take you to the hospital very, very quickly," said one in the melodic sing-song way the native Indian speaks English. All I could do was nod in agreement. Belching blue smoke, the ancient taxi lurched off down narrow, winding streets, the driver constantly beeping his horn to shoo cows and pedestrians out of the road. 15 minutes later, we braked in front of a long, rambling stone structure. One of my saviors ran inside and a few minutes later came back with 2 stretcher bearers. I was gently lifted onto the canvas stretcher. My pack was placed at my feet and I was hurried inside into another century, another world, another reality. The hospital looked and smelled like it probably had 150 years ago when it had been built by the British Empire. The walls had once been white, but they were now grimy and dirty from years of neglect. The corridors were long and low, and it seemed like I was carried along for ages, down hallways and passages, upstairs, downstairs, through countless doors in the murky light. Inquiring faces peered down at me, some smiling, some grave. As I lay panting and sweating, it all seemed nightmarish and unreal. There was a pervasive smell in the air as of cooking meat, but I found out later it was of funeral pyres of those who had died in the hospital. For the next week, I smelled burning human flesh all day and all night. Many people died there. At last I was carried into a small room and the stretcher was put down on the floor. One of the young men who had brought me here from the bus looked down at me, smiled, and said a doctor will be here soon. He said his name was Adi and he would come back to see me. Then he was gone and I was left alone on a stretcher on the floor, alternating between chills and fever, my stomach feeling like a fire pit. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually a man in a grubby white coat came in and asked for my passport. He wrote on a form and told someone out of sight to please bring me a cup of tea. He asked me some questions, felt around my stomach, and gravely informed me that I had dysentery, probably amoebic dysentery, and I would have to stay in the hospital for a while. Before I could get my tea, which I couldn't have kept down anyway, the stretcher was picked up, and I began another Alice in Wonderland journey, up and down stairs, and along corridors and hallways, the crying sounds of people in pain, the smell of those outside burning. The stretcher would tip as I was carried upstairs, and then tip the other way as we went down. I was nauseous, cold, hot, almost delirious with the turmoil going on in my intestines. And always the faces peering down at me as we moved past, word obviously having spread about the foreign traveller being admitted to this hellish place. Looks of encouragement with bright smiles, looks of concern with grave countenances moved in and out of my field of vision, blurred and indistinct. Finally, I was carried into a small ward with a few beds. Only one of them was occupied, and I was gently placed on a rickety white bed frame and the stretcher pulled out from under me. A nurse came in and wiped the sweat from my face. Then she fussed around with a needle and inserted a drip into my arm. This was a painful procedure, and she wasn't very good at it. Over the next few hours, I fell in and out of consciousness. There was always someone standing over me when I would open my eyes, a nurse, a helper, but mostly patients in ragged clothes just staring at me, curiosity and concern on their faces. My hair was long and tangled, my beard was thick. Perhaps I looked like a Western Sikh to them. My backpack lay at the foot of my bed, and I was worried that it would be stolen, but that never happened. Apparently there was a code of honor here, that you don't rob from someone who's in the same wretched state you are. I had nightmares and suffered intense pain the first night, somehow managing to get up with the help of whoever was standing next to my bed, not noticing who they were, in order to go to the toilet. Needless to say, here, as in most of India, flushing toilets were unheard of. A hole in the floor and a pitcher of water to clean yourself. Flies, excrement, filth. In the morning, a nervous nurse brought me a cup of sweet tea. I smiled a weak thank you to her and she scurried off. I took a sip and instantly threw up. It seemed I could keep nothing down. The doctor finally came in, his badge proclaiming him to be Dr. A. Gupta, very professional and doctor-like, full of his own importance as an educated man, surrounded by poor, ignorant peasants. "Well, well, well," he chirped. Yes, you have the dysentery very, very bad. You are totally dehydrated, and I think it will be quite some time before you can eat anything, yes." How long must I be here?" I croaked, my dry throat rasping. Well, that is very difficult to say. You are very weak and must let your body gain strength and balance. It could be days, it could be weeks, but we will make sure you are very comfortable here in our fine hospital." I laughed inwardly and thanked him for his concern and care. That is no problem. I will keep you on the IV drip and you must drink tea as much as you are able." How much will this cost me a day?" I asked. My money was running low and I had no way of having more wired to me here in this remote town. In fact, no one knew I was here. Not my friends who were themselves travelling south or east, nor anyone outside of India. I was totally alone, with no way to communicate my situation. "Oh, no, sir. There is no charge for medical assistance in India. We have a perfect health system, supported by our government. Please do not concern yourself at all about the cost," he answered. The next 2 days, the pain in my gut grew worse and worse. I had a book on Hatha Yoga that I had been reading for the past few weeks, and I remembered to focus all my energy to the part of my body that was hurting, willing it to get better. I was losing weight rapidly, a combination of the dehydration and not being able to eat anything. I felt weak and confused. On the third day, I woke from a fitful, sweat-filled sleep, and the pain was so intense it felt like a burning sun in my stomach. I rolled and flopped on the bed and yanked the IV out of my arm. The pain grew worse. It was like a giant ball of flame. Everything became yellow, orange, deep red. The physical agony was so intense and all-pervasive that something snapped and my body crossed into another place where the pain became pleasure. Okay, tune in for part 2. What happens to Captain John in India? It involves war, spies. Stay with me.